Well, good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us. I am very pleased to be here. I'm Scott Stossel, the editor of the Atlantic magazine. And so far, much of, if for those of you who've been here for the duration of the proceedings today, we've talked a lot about what's happening inside U.S. borders. And but now we have an opportunity to actually talk about the impact of progress at home on LGBT communities that are abroad. And specifically, I want to talk about we have the opportunity to talk about the asylum process for LGBT people seeking asylum, as refugees here in the United States. So I'm sitting on my far right here is Nicole Santamaría, who is actually in the middle of the asylum process. She is a trans woman from El Salvador who left the country amid ongoing and frequent violence toward LGBT people, and especially towards the trans community. So came here for sort of her own safety, but also to continue to advocate, maximize her opportunity to advocate for the trans community. And sitting to her left and my right is her attorney, Cori Alonso-Yoder, who is a supervising attorney at Whitman-Walker Health, who is helping Nicole and people like her to navigate through this complicated asylum process. And we don't have a lot of time, but for starters, Nicole, talk about where you are in your asylum-seeking process. You came here how long ago? How much longer do you have to go? And what drove you here in the first place?
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for hearing me. I'm Nicole Santamaría. I'm an intersex, transsexual woman. In past April of this year, I was brutally attacked in El Salvador. 9 days later, I arrived here to United States, and one month after, the bookkeeper, a colleague, and a friend of the Colectivo, that I was found with another transgender and intersex women was murdered. I've been here exactly today, 8 months ago. In these past 8 months, 18 transgender women were murdered, and 4 gay men were murdered with luxury of barbarism. So I came here because I chose life, and because I knew that if I continue doing the work that I was doing, I came in 2013 for the first time to the United States to denounce Salvadorian state for the impunity and also for violence against LGBTQI community. And even that the Inter-American Commission sent the recommendations to El Salvador didn't do nothing about those issues that are killing us. So now I'm here. I started the process. I had the lucky and the opportunity to came here with a visa. So I didn't pass through all the situations to be under detention centers that other transgender and LGBTQI brothers and sisters pass through. But I realized in this process that I'm now that there are people suffering in those places, and there are people still struggling and suffering in my home countries, especially Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. So if I had the opportunity and I have the privilege to speak the language, and also to know people from the Inter-American Commission and a network of people who were working with me since El Salvador. So that's why I'm here, to speak out and try to help others. So on April 1st, I almost got killed, and they left me because they thought that I was already dead. But I can say that I asked for help when I was there, and the help never arrived.
Who's they? Who didn't help you?
Well, actually, there were people I was working with LGBTQI issues, but I said that I was attacked and that we were planning an event, a LGBTQI human rights event, and they said, "Oh well, I'm sorry that happened to you, but are you able to continue with your work?" And I was like, "I don't think so." So it was pretty hard that the help was given here when I was already out of my country. And there's people still struggling and dying there because of the violence. So I really believe that we have a lot of things to do.
A lot of work to do, yeah.
And yeah.
And what's, and I want to turn it to Cori next, but what are the motivations for the violence directed towards you and people in the transgender community? Is it why in El Salvador and elsewhere is there such I don't know if it's discomfort that leads to violence, or if it's the Catholic Church, or if it's the government. What is the source of the dangerous violence that's being directed at you and others?
I think that we have to have a huge perspective of the context of El Salvador. I born exactly the same day the Civil War started, on October 10th, 1979. So since that moment, the people of El Salvador, we don't know the meaning of peace, of the meaning of human rights. So when poor people and marginalized people like LGBTQI community, we don't have access to any kind of rights or any kind of improvements. We don't have a lack of policies in El Salvador. We don't have a non-discrimination based on gender identity or sexual orientation. We don't have any kind of law. We don't have a typification of hate crimes. We don't have a gender identity law. We don't have nothing. We don't have nothing of policies that can protect us. If you don't have anything that comes from the state to protect you, anyone can do whatever they want with you, with any reason, you know. It could be religion reason, it could be a machista culture, it could be misogynia, it could be homophobia, lesbo, transphobia, whatever, because we don't have nothing in the legal system to protect us.
And is that because of the way the Constitution is written, or because of the way that Catholicism, you know, sort of conservative Catholicism is woven into the culture there, or why is that there's less legal protection there and less kind of cultural acceptance there than there is, you know, only recently, say now, here?
Well, I think that the intersectionalities that we must talk about is gender-based violence, starting with women violence, because women and all the things related with women and their femininity in El Salvador is seen as something less, or something that is wrong, or something that is weak. So we have high levels of rapes in El Salvador. Every day, the statistics said that every day 4 women are raped daily in El Salvador. So when you have that, and would you have a gay, lesbian, transgender community, they are always related. The machista culture, they are always related. The weakness of the femininity with gay people, lesbian women, or transgender community. Transgender community, I'm speaking about transgender women and transgender men, because we both got raped in El Salvador.
Right. Cori, let me ask you. I mean, we're talking about this at a particular moment where the subject of the moment is immigration from Syria, refugees from Syria and from the Middle East generally. So, for lack of a better way of putting it, you know, taking on the case of a transgender person from Latin America, as important morally and human terms for her as it is, what motivated you to do that as opposed to something that is, you know, higher on the kind of national radar screen or set of, you know, political priorities given everything that's going on in the current political campaign?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question, because it is the current dialogue around refugee issues and immigration issues. But, you know, frankly, there was not a choice for me. That this is the need that we see daily at Whitman-Walker in our legal services department. So right now, the statistics show that there's about 1,500 Syrian refugees who are being settled into the United States. In June, there were 1,500 people who were intercepted at the border and given credible fear interviews, and primarily from Latin America. So that's, you know, just 1 month versus the entire population of Syrian refugees who've been resettled in the area or in the country. So, you know, Nicole it represents kind of a sector of our clientele that is not talked about in the media and is not really understood, but who we see every day. We see folks coming from El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Mexico, Venezuela, who've all experienced transphobic, lesbophobic, homophobic violence, and they're kind of getting stuck into this funnel of the asylum system that's really being clogged with all the violence that's being precipitated in these countries by not just government actors, but actors that the government can't control in the form of gang violence, crazy gang violence that's really pushing LGBTQI folks out of the area because they're one of the most marginalized groups, and so thus easy targets, easy prey for some of these criminals. But then also entire family groups, young people, and you know that the media has kind of picked that up a little bit more. Some of the families, the women, the young people who are facing recruitment by gangs and are trying to escape, they're all going into the same asylum system. So Scott's question to Nicole is, where is she in her process? She's only a couple months into what we anticipate being a couple-year process, which last year was about a 3 to 4 month process. And it's because there's this logjam of folks who are seeking protection here in the United States and are being met with a system that's not structurally adequate to respond to their needs. So when it comes to Syrian refugees, they're experiencing staggering violence, and the LGBTQI population in those areas are also experiencing staggering violence. But those folks are being classified as refugees before they come to this country. So they're coming here, those who manage to get through, are coming here already eligible for benefits. They're eligible for resettlement. Regardless of what any governor of a certain state may say, they are federally eligible for those sorts of protections. Folks in Nicole's situation are not eligible for federal public benefits. They're not eligible for food stamps. They're not eligible for health care. So they're coming and they're being pushed into this underclass where they've come to seek protection, and they're being put into this second-class, third-class status where they can't work. So Nicole can't work. She's not allowed to have a work authorization for at least 6 months from the time of her filing. They can't seek health care. They can't be fed. They have to kind of reach out to the community organizations, and Casa Ruby has had a lot of attention here today, and rightly so. Some places like that are really the only places that asylum seekers can turn to survive on the day-to-day basis. So as far as where the narrative is regarding immigration or regarding refugees and asylum seekers, my heart goes out to the folks who are coming from Syria, and we do need to be accepting of those folks, but we also need to be more aware of some of the other people in our backyards who we're not paying as much attention to, and who are representing a far higher proportion of the folks who are seeking protection here in the U.S.
Interesting. I was looking at some of the numbers, and obviously El Salvador has incredibly high rates of violence, even relative to the United States in absolute terms. But both in El Salvador and in the U.S., rates of violence and murder, most, dramatically, tragically, against trans people is rising. Is that, and this is a question for either or both of you, why is that happening? Is that just that the murder rates in some cities in the United States and in El Salvador are rising overall, and so trans people are, as a proportion of that, also getting targeted? Or is there an explicit targeting of trans and other LGBT people? And what accounts for that, if that's the case? And that's for both of you.
Well, actually, I really believe that, transgender community in El Salvador, we don't have any kind of policy, as I told you. So since we were little, we don't have the opportunity to go to school either. So when you don't have the opportunity to go to school, you don't have the opportunity in the future to get a job. Even that you have because I'm part of the 0.03% of people who had the opportunity to go to finish high school, to go to college and everything. But even myself, that I had the access or the privilege to study, I wasn't able to get a regular job.
Yeah. Because
nobody hired a transgender person. So when you don't have access to jobs, when you don't have jobs opportunity, when you don't have, for example, access to health or health insurance, because we don't have in El Salvador, what else that you have to do? Because we have the bad costume also, as anyone else here, we have hunger 3 times per day. So we need to do something. So the majority of the transgender community are on the streets. So as a sex worker, so they are easy targets for anyone. As we were talking before, that at 6 in the evening, everyone knows, and there are famous streets in El Salvador, that it is a sex workplace, and everyone knows where transgender women are. So they are really easy targets for anyone. So I think that the marginalization, it is an easy target. And also, we are also prosecuted by the police.
Yeah.
So, for example, when I was attacked, for me, it wasn't possible to go to the police and make a complaint.
You can't seek help from the state because the state is the...
Exactly, and the state isn't either with the will to do something. When my colleague, she was murdered on May 31st, during the morning, and a cisgender woman, her friend, was also murdered with her. Everyone knew in that house what was happening in that house because they heard the screamings. Actually, my friend could escape, and they got it again, and she was the first who got killed. So nobody called the police because people are more, we don't know to whom afraid more, from the police or from the gangs, you know? And also the gangs and the police are involved in the same thing because my country is a corrupt country. It is a failed state.
Yeah.
So with that context, what we can do.
Yeah, and the rise in violence, there's been a lot of discussion about the gangs and the criminality, and you know, a lot of that is really directly traceable to our immigration policies over the decades of, you know, taking folks who have come in waves to the United States from Central America, in the case of El Salvador, coming from fleeing El Salvador's civil war in the 1980s, being allowed to remain here in a temporary protected status in a lot of cases, and in some cases having folks who came here fleeing this violence with this, you know, very near recent memory of violence, moving into cultures where they learned gang culture, and then, you know, not quite having a very stable basis here in the United States, being deported back to El Salvador with what they've learned of violence here in the United States, and just this cycle that continues, especially with, you know, amped up enforcement, more removal, and it just has been more than I think the Salvadoran government and infrastructure could really handle. And over the years, the U.S. has responded by instituting great immigration policies like the temporary protected status that's existed in every iteration, really, of Salvadoran migration until this most recent wave of violence. You know, from the 1980s until now, we've had 2 different Salvadoran TPSs, temporary protected status, that's designated by the executive without the need for congressional approval. And this is the first of the 3 waves of Salvadoran migration where we haven't seen the U.S. respond with the designation through the Department of Homeland Security designating TPS for El Salvador. And I think that that would be a really strong way to release a safety valve on the asylum process that right now is really burdened with all of these folks who are coming through and are legitimately seeking protection, but for whom there has to be an individualized asylum process. TPS nationally designated would make it a lot easier for people to immediately get protection and start to reestablish their lives.
Well, we're running out of time, but I have 2 really quick questions, and I don't know if we'll have time for questions for the audience. But one is, you know, you worked in El Salvador as an art therapist.
Yes.
How does that, in 30 seconds or less, how does that process work to help people heal from being victims of violence against LGBT?
Well, actually, I became an art therapist because my background is design. I'm a product designer. And the first time that I was attacked, that was the break moment that I became an activist. I became an activist because of an accident. So I realized that art, for me, was the way that I could feel, and I heal myself. So right now, I'm not healing nobody. I'm joining them in their personal journey to heal. I'm just a tool to join other survivors, because the point for me is not to be a victim anymore. Because actually, they left me for dead, but I'm not dead. And actually, I reborn here in this country on November 3rd, that here in this country that we have policies here, I could change my name. Because if I dead in my country, I will dead and I will be buried with a male name.
Interesting.
So,
well, that leads to my next question, and unfortunately, I've left us with no time for questions from the audience. But you know, at the Atlantic, we specialize in what we call kind of the big, dumb, ignorant question. And my big, dumb, ignorant question for you is, you know, you're, as an intersexual, you're born with you know, both male and female genitalia. How did you decide, like, you know, when you became conscious, did you know that you identified as female? Like, how did you know which way you wanted to go, or if either way.
Well, I think that answer, that's another huge
That
talk
may be
show.
a whole separate, yeah.
Yeah, that's another show. But actually, for example, the other Nicole, she explains really well. It is just the way that, and her father told, it is a way that you feel since little. Is the self-perception that you have if you are female or a male or whatever. Intersexuality is only a biological thing, you know, that you're born with some characteristics, both characteristics. But the gender identity is quite the same as any one of us here. We know if we are men, women, or we are not, or
So
we don't want to.
When you were 4 years old or 8 years old, you knew I'm a woman.
I knew when I was 3 years old, when I dressed with my sister dress, but I was assigned as a male in my birth certificate. So that's why I'm intersexual, transsexual woman.
Because you had to then officially
Because
make the
my
change.
gender identity is female.
So, well, I wish we had more time, but thank you very much
Thank
to
you.
Nicole and Cori. Thank you all. So.